So the tagline for the fresh, super affordable Poco M3 smartphone is more than you expect, and by that I guess they probably meant something like biting into a delicious looking donut and discovering a £50 note baked inside the bugger. A nice surprise, in other words, rather than like a crying game situation. And that's kind of true, although sadly the Poco M3 does still have its fair share of problems, but this is still a solid budget smartphone and a decent rival to the likes of the Redmi 9, the Nokia 5.3 and other cheapy handsets from 2020. Now I've been using the Poco M3 as my personal full-time handset for the last several days, so here's my in-depth Poco M3 review, and for more on the latest greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Now this handset certainly has a very distinctive design, for better or worse. No one's going to be asking what phone you're using because it's pretty f***ing obvious from the huge enormous logo imprinted on the arse. It's definitely not as big as the branding on the back end of the Poco X3, but it's certainly more obvious here on the Poco M3 because of the stark contrast between the black and the white. The actual back itself is made from plastic, pretty standard for a budget blower, although rather than a typical shiny finish you instead have a textured surface here. It doesn't really do much to aid the grip with the Poco M3, but it does at least mean you're not constantly buffing up this phone to get rid of greasy smears and skank, because all of that stuff is hidden pretty well. And while this black model is, to be frank, rather dull, even with the out there camera cutout, you can also grab the Poco M3 in a blue colour or a proper bit of in-your-face yellow. And don't worry if you like to toss your smartphone about the place as well, because those plastic parts don't seem to scratch up at all. After a full week of abuse, still in tip-top condition. And the same goes for the front as well, which is actually coated in Gorilla Glass 3. Now, we're still waiting for Android 11 here on the M3, but you do at least get the latest MiUI 12 from Xiaomi smushed on top, with a few Poco flavoured tweaks as usual. Overall though, I found that the software experience here on the Poco M3 was very similar to cheapy Xiaomi smartphones that I'd already reviewed, like the Mi 10T Lite. So you get the same great additions here, like a proper gaming mode and some sneaky little tools like the video toolbox, which allows you to, for instance, stream YouTube videos when the phone is actually hibernating. And that's perfect if you just want to listen to a live music performance or an audiobook or something like that on YouTube while you're out and about. Oh, and one good thing about the Poco compared with more Xiaomi smartphones is that you get a lot less crapware stuffed on there to begin with. And yeah, the occasional ad still appears when you're installing an app, but these are very easily ignored and skipped past, no big deal at all. Sadly though, I did see a couple of quirky little bugs in my short time with the Poco M3, similar to what I saw on the Mi 10T Lite. So once again, for instance, it was impossible to swipe away some pop-up bubbles like those Google Sports updates. That particular example, of course, is not too troublesome, something that you can quite easily work your way around. And I found that the Poco M3's dual-band Wi-Fi support was perfectly dependable, as was the mobile network connection when I was actually out and about. You've got space for 2 SIMs, as well as an extra bonus slot for micro SD memory cards up to ½ TB for expanding the 64 or 128 gigs of storage. Of course, some cuts do have to be made in order to achieve a budget asking price like the Poco M3, so sadly there's no NFC on board, so while you do have Google Pay pre-installed on there, you can't use it for contactless payments. Now the 6.53-inch IPS screen is definitely a step above most Motos and other rivals around this price point, and also a match for the Redmi 9 with its crisp Full HD Plus resolution. Colours look natural and contrast is on point as well, with very strong blacks for an IPS panel. Overall, it's impressive stuff, and with only a dinky wee nipple notch intruding on the show when you decide to go full screen. Sadly, that display isn't quite perfect though. For one, the auto brightness absolutely sucks donkey d***. I found it was generally alright when using outdoors and so on, but I found that in the evenings it went far too dim, so I had to really squint to see what was going on, and eventually I would just give up and manually tweak it. And I also found that the responsiveness was a bit off when I was using the virtual keyboard to type out a message, so if you're typing fast, you got to hit the shift key, more often than not it simply won't register, and the same for the special characters button. The stereo speaker setup is fine if you're not in a noisy environment, but you will want to plug in some headphones to enjoy a proper bit of high-res audio. And you got Bluetooth 5.0 support here on the Poco M3. I found this was fine for headphones. It tended to break up a little bit if you did stray more than a room away from your smartphone, but otherwise fine. However, I did have issues streaming to a couple of speakers with this thing. I found that occasionally the audio did break up rather badly. And I have no idea why headphones were fine, but speakers tended to throw up issues. Bit of a weird, quirky one, but yeah, kind of annoying as well. Now, power comes courtesy of a Snapdragon 662 SoC. That's the same chipset favoured by Motorola for its new Moto G G9 power and play, and here on the Poco it is backed by 4 gigs of RAM. Performance can be rather jittery at times, to say the least, here on the Poco M3, fairly standard for this sort of budget smartphone, but it's also a situation that is compounded by the rather heavy overlay. The good news is though that the Adreno 610 GPU can handle gaming on titles like Call of Duty on high detail levels without a struggle, and that's helped along by the helpful resource management tools in the Game Turbo menu. Yeah, I did see a couple of little stumbles here and there, but they're impressively rare, and even when I was gaming for a solid hour, the Poco M3 only got a little bit warm with no degradation to performance. And while I struggled with screen responsiveness while typing messages on the Poco M3, I had no such issues using the touch controls in games like Call of Duty, weirdly. In fact, I even managed to get the top score in not just one round but a handful, and if I can manage that, then the Poco must be actually pretty bloody good. And the Poco M3 definitely impresses when it comes to the battery prowess as well, matching the likes of the Moto G9 Power with its beefy 6000 mAh cell. I found that more often than not I could stretch to 2 full days of use from the Poco M3 before I needed to plug it back in, and that's with a bit of gaming, plenty of movie streaming, music streaming, all that good stuff. And when you do finally run dry, the Poco at least supports 18-watt charging as well, so you won't have to literally plug it in all night long to fill up that 6000 mAh battery again. Now let's finish off with the optics, and the camera setup here is headed by a 48 megapixel primary sensor which captures photos in 12 megapixel resolution by default. Now, as with the general everyday performance here on the Poco M3, I did notice that camera could be a little bit slow at times, so sometimes you'd hit the shutter button, there'd be a bit of a pause of a second or so before it actually took a photo, by which point less patient subjects have already buggered right off. If you can actually convince them to stick around though, chances are your pic will look alright. Detail levels are definitely lacking when you view back a photo on anything bigger than a phone screen though, while the focus did occasionally struggle to properly latch onto whatever I wanted it to. More vibrant hues unfortunately aren't captured with their full splendour, often appearing a bit muted in my test photos. And if you shoot pics indoors or in ambient light, you can also expect some grain to come creeping in too. And yes, there is a dedicated night mode, but unsurprisingly its powers are rather limited. The portrait mode tends to work alright though, helped along by the 2 megapixel depth sensor. And there's actually no ultra wide angle lens here on the Poco M3, just a 2 megapixel macro lens to round things off, which frankly just no. And I wouldn't depend on the video mode too heavily either. This can capture basic home movies at Full HD plus resolution, but picture quality often falls flat, while the lack of image stabilization is another sticking point. Flip around to the front and you've got a basic 8 megapixel selfie camera which struggles against harsh lighting and offers grainy results when you're indoors, so again it's best used only for simple snaps. Although at least that portrait mode works rather well again, without the benefit of a depth sensor. So that right there is my full final review of the Poco M3, which for 150 quid offers some pretty superb features like that gorgeous Full HD Plus display, and of course that mighty 6000 mAh battery which will keep you going for 2 days on a single charge. However, unfortunately the Poco M3 can be a bit quirky at times. That camera tech is rather basic at best as well, so I would say if you can at all stretch up another 50 quid or so to the Poco X3, it's definitely well worth that upgrade. Otherwise, of course, there are alternatives like the Nokia 5.3 which offers a more stock Android experience and therefore slightly better performance. But anyway, that's what I think of the Poco M3 after using it as my full-time smartphone for about a week or so. What do you think? Have you been using the Poco M3? It'd be great to hear your own personal mini review down below as well. Go check out my roundups of the best budget smartphones out there. My roundup of the best budget under £200 smartphones should be going live imminently, so to make sure you don't miss that, do please poke subscribe, ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a fantastic rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you.